in talking to executives, I got a sense that they were struggling with many of the same things that I was struggling with, and for lack of a better word, I call it joyful thriving. It's one thing to thrive, where you're stretching and dreaming and accomplishing goals and solving problems. It's another issue altogether whether you are joyful about it, whether you feel free, and whether you're actually achieving with your best self. And I think that combination is really, really important to our overall well-being and happiness. Having joy and thriving and learning and stretching and moving ahead.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jay Scherr, host of Business Minds Coffee Chat, where you get a captivating look inside the minds of game changers, risk takers, and visionaries who turn ideas into breakthroughs that shake up the world. Our mission is to give you fresh ways to think that spark growth in your business and life so you can make a mark that lasts. Let's jump right in. So I thought a good starting point for us, Bob, would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself.
Wow. I think my intellectual curiosity and my sense of adventure, trying to expand my perspective and worldview. I am a lover of learning, and I remember I wanted to write a book on global leadership, and my husband turned to me of 42 years and he said, "What the hell do you know about global leadership?" So it's sort of like, when we're committed to learning and we're committed to exploring new vistas, the world opens up for you.
Absolutely. I love that. So can we explore a little bit about the intellectual curiosity and that sense of adventure? And what I would love for you to share with us, if we could maybe wind the clock back a bit and explore a bit of your early years, your childhood. Were you someone who was curious and had a sense of adventure even at an early age in life?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in a lower middle class family,
Hmm.
and uh, I clearly wanted to become successful. I was quite ambitious. I went to a big public high school. I wouldn't say that my high school education was excellent, but I was curious. And I then went to college at the University of Virginia, and I became very interested in psychology. But early on, I had an attachment to the past, which drove me into the future because of my ambition and my love of learning. And one of the things I had to make peace with is that you have control over your future. You can shape your future in how you look at life and how you pursue your dreams and goals. And so that was early on in my life. And then when I got into my PhD program for clinical psychology, I really found my heart and my voice and my love of human psychology. I mean, I've always been a student of self awareness and self development. And and like many of us, I had a personal life and a professional life, and I became very aware of the connection between what's going on inside of us and what's going on outside of us.
Hmm.
So, those were early on sort of revelations in my life. Then I got a call from the MacArthur Foundation, and they had heard of some of the work that I had been doing on trying to take principles of behavioral science into the workplace. And to make a long story short, they decided to invest $5 million in a multi-year program to study leadership and healthier organizations because they were very concerned about companies and organizations being able to give people what they needed and wanted from work at the same time that organizations got what they needed and wanted from people. And so that took me on a very vigorous leadership research program where I sat face to face with probably now about 500 CEOs in maybe 65 countries, the heads of Canon and Boeing and Coca-Cola and Novartis and all across the world. And I really became a student of CEO leadership and how they were managing and mismanaging their companies based on their own self-awareness and their own development.
So you really did then delve into the world of global leadership,
Yeah, I did.
right? Absolutely.
I did.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to stay back a bit in time because you had mentioned that early on you had an interest in psychology, and what was it specifically prior to the PhD program? What was it specifically about psychology that was such an interest to you? And at what stage in life did that really begin for you? Was it pre-college or was it once you entered the University of Virginia? Which, by the way, I'm from Richmond, Virginia. Very familiar with the University of Virginia.
Yeah. Oh, it was before college.
Okay.
My parents divorced when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to understand that. I had to put it in perspective. I think every child has some deep feelings when their families are broken up. And I became very independent and very interested in how I could continue my evolution as a person in light of the fact that I came from a broken family in a lower middle class community. So I became very interested in the psychology of myself and the psychology of people. And that really led into my career. And it is interesting that my father was not a particularly strong person. He was a very anxious person.
Mm-hmm.
And years later in my life, I had a conversation with my dad, and he was feeling really bad about the fact that he wasn't the father that he wanted to be. And I said, Dad, I said, my relationship with you gave me so much personal power and confidence to interact with father-like figures, which enabled me to confidently walk into a CEO's office and feel like a peer in my interviewing. So it was really a lovely conversation that I had, that I was really complimenting him in light of his frailties, that he actually gave me the skills to do what I did in my work.
Sounds like what a father does, or
Yeah,
what we would hope that a father would do.
yeah, a
So
little
to
indirectly.
that, yeah. So to that point, how did he respond to what you had shared with him?
Oh, I think it made him feel really good. He never
Mm-hmm.
felt confident in himself, and I think he also always asked me. He said, "I don't know what you do, but how in the world do you make money?" I don't get it. You make money by talking to people, and they pay you for that?
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's how my career evolved.
That's so good. So, you had mentioned that you had an attachment to the past,
Yeah.
and share with us, and also I'm kind of tying this a bit to what you said about your father, that he w- wasn't very strong, was an anxious person. What is something that you believed about yourself early in life that as you navigated life, you realized wasn't true?
Well, I think what happened was I overcompensated by the insecurity from coming from a lower middle class family. And
Hmm.
I hid my anxiety and overcompensated to be the best little boy in the world. And I started being rewarded for that. I got a DuPont
Meaning,
scholarship.
okay, so
Yeah,
that's what I wanted. I wanted to hear what that meant to you.
yeah, I got a full DuPont scholarship to UVA. I got my
Mm.
PhD when I was 24. I got my MacArthur Foundation grant by 30. But underneath the surface, there was a gap between who I was as a person and who I wanted to be. And many of us live in that gap between our ideal self and our real self. And the happiest people are able to make those very aligned. So, who you are is what you aspire to be. And so I had to confront my attachment to the future because I was always looking into the future to close that gap and be successful. But it created a lot of stress. And I think by my second trimester, around 30, I was on an ambition train. But a couple things happened in my health. I had two bowel obstructions, I had two back surgeries. I got addicted at one point to opiates from the surgeries,
Ooh.
and and I really had to step back and ask myself, why was I living so much in the future, and why was I so attached to success? And probably in my 50s, I started realizing that I needed to really fall in love with myself and not be so intensely driven in my life. And a lot of business people go through this experience where at some time in their midlife, they have to step back and ask themselves, am I the person that I really want to be despite all these successes in my life? And so I went through that process. And fortunately, I had my husband of 42 years by my side at that point. But as I look back, I learned to confront these three attachments that were like baggage inside of me: my attachment to the past, my attachment to the future, and my attachment to success. And as a result, I was able to discover some heightened awareness, more courage, more honesty, more resilience, and just more comfort in who I
Mm.
was. And the last 25 years have been wonderful in that sense.
So, so tell me, so realizing that you needed to fall in love with yourself and that you need to be aligned with the person who you want to be and the person who you are, who at this point where you were struggling a bit, who did you want to be versus the who you were? So you were chasing success, you're doing all these things, you're accomplishing, and I don't know for you what was going on in your mind. I know from my own personal experience that chase for titles and money and ego and all the things. And so but for you, what did you see as far as the person who you wanted to be and that gap? What did you do to close that gap? So let's start with the person who you wanted to be, and then let's talk about the closing of that gap. And you mentioned that your husband was certainly instrumental or was there through part of those years, and I'd like to find out how he was able to also help you through that process. So if you can share a little bit about that as well, that would be beneficial.
Well, I think that I had a vision of, and in talking to executives, I got a sense that they were struggling with many of the same things that I was struggling with, and for lack of a better word, I call it joyful thriving. It's one thing to thrive where you're stretching and dreaming and accomplishing goals and solving problems. It's another issue altogether whether you are joyful about it, whether you
Mm.
feel free, and whether you're actually achieving with your best self. And I think that combination is really, really important to our overall well being and happiness. Having joy and thriving and learning and stretching and moving ahead. And so that was my vision. And
Okay.
I saw that as something that many leaders struggled with in their lives, and they hadn't found that right balance between joy and success. And that really crystallized when I really understood more the attachment to success. Because, one of the things about well, first off, I want to just take a second and talk about these attachments for a second.
Please.
Um, why do we make life so difficult when it doesn't have to be that way? Um, every morning we wake up and we turn on a switch, consciously or unconsciously, and we choose to live the day, choose to live the moment in love or fear. But for many of us, something goes awry. We get distracted, we get sabotaged, we get seduced by conversations that we have with ourselves that undermine our best selves. And so you might ask, I call these attachments, and it emanates from Buddhist and Taoist psychology. But where do these come from? And how do they show up in our lives? And how do they poison our overall happiness and freedom? And we end up not living the life that we want to live. So I think of this as baggage we carry that trip us up, that drag us down, that wear us out. They're stories that we invent, that we tell ourselves over and over, like mind constructed illusions that sit inside ourselves, and we get stuck in these recycled narratives inside ourselves. And so the freer that we can get from this baggage, and all this baggage is driven by fear, some kind of fear in our lives. And so I became fascinated by how we hold ourselves back, how we undermine and sabotage ourselves in very simple ways. And the only way out is awareness.
Mm.
Awareness is the true catalyst for any kind of change. And that's, and fortunately, the brain has incredible potential. It has the capacity to reprogram and rewire itself, and it truly is an ever-changing reality creating machine. And the good news is that awareness and focusing on your fears will set you free.
So let's talk about that awareness for a moment, because of you mentioned you've been in front of and have had conversations with over 500 CEOs globally, and many had similar concerns, similar challenges, and that sense of awareness. I think of blind spots
Yeah,
that we all have, right? We all
great.
have them. And in the work that I do in coaching business owners and leaders and teams, it's always so interesting to me when you start to become aware of the blind spots that you didn't know were there before, but other people were able to see them, right? But once you're aware, then you can start to make change, but not until that point comes. And then it's, what do you do with that self-awareness? So as you were having these conversations with CEOs, is that also something that you saw quite prevalent, that maybe they didn't have that level of self-awareness, even though they were in the CEO position and in some cases with some of the top companies in the world?
Well, people change for lots of different reasons. Sometimes you have awareness and sometimes you don't. There's some CEOs who will change because they have the capacity to go deep inside themselves, and they're not afraid of their fears. They're not afraid of their vulnerabilities. They openly admit that, they're struggling or they don't have answers to life's problems or business problems. And then you have leaders who will only change if the economics and the metrics and the return on investment demonstrates that one strategy is better than another strategy. Then you have leaders who will change if their competitors start to do something and they're not doing it. And then there's finally a fourth group that doesn't change. And slowly but truly, their performance goes down over time, and sometimes they fail. So, every CEO is different in terms of how they change and the insight that they bring into their own development. And it's not just CEOs, it's executives, it's any leader. If I was lucky, I had a CEO who could talk at this level that we're talking about. But a lot of key people won't or can't or choose not to go there. So the question is, how do you help them change without having a language that is deep and psychological? And I think that's one of the great challenges of great coaches, is how do you help people change that cannot have these kinds of conversations or choose not to?
That's a great point and a great question to ponder on. And that's one of the things that I love about your latest book, Detach, which, clearly we're going to be talking more about this and talking about those attachments that you've already alluded to. And of course, you already brought up 3 of them. But it's really interesting because your book does such a great job, or you do such a good job in the writing, to give great examples and stories and applicable strategies and things that we can do as we identify and talk through those 10 attachments, that baggage that we all carry within. And sometimes it can be for good, and often it's not. So understanding that, having that level of self-awareness so we can then do something about it, is always the area that I try to focus on. So let's start here, if we could, since you've already mentioned 3 of the attachments. Let's go through very quickly, if you could list the 10. And it's certainly in our conversation today, we're not going to be able to dive deep into each and every one of those. But what I would like to do is I'd like to focus on a few of them and give our audience not only the attachment itself, but what we can actually do about that attachment, right? So the actual the antidote, and next steps. So let's start with the 10.
Okay. So the first one is the attachment to stability, then the attachment to the past or the attachment to the future, the attachment to control, the attachment to perfection, the attachment to success, the attachment to pleasure, the attachment to youth, the attachment to yourself, and the attachment to life. And each one of those has a fear or a set of fears that drives that attachment. And so the key is to develop awareness, understand the attachment, understand that desired state that you want to get out of this, and then figure out what you have to do day to day to pursue that aspiration. So those are the 10. And I came up with them during a dream. In 2010, I had a dream that I was shackled, chained down by a couple of them. And I woke up and I wrote down these 10 attachments. I have no idea where they came from. I think it's just an accumulation of life experiences from listening to other people and turning inward with myself. And I put them in the attic for about 11 years because I knew that this book would take a little more from me. And I needed to do another round of interviews. And eventually I brought it out in 2021, and the rest is history. So it had a little history to it as well.
So it came through a dream, which,
Yep.
in and of itself is very interesting. And you have studied both Eastern and Western philosophy. And there was a period of time for a few years where I went deep into Buddhism. That's not how I was raised, but there was something about it that was very attractive to me. And when we talk about attachments, I learned about that first, at least from my experience, through my study of Buddhism. So how do attachments, as you write about them in this book, how do they differ from attachments that are talked about in Buddhism, or are they the same?
They're basically the same. I mean, in the Western world, we think of attachments as related to relationships, attachment between a mother and a child, or between two partners, or attachments to work. And attachments, and Western psychology focuses a lot on setting goals, dreams, aspirations, problem solving. Eastern psychology focuses on the impermanence of life, the fact that uncertainty is reality and stability is an illusion, which is really what that first attachment is all about. And it's also about how we get attached to various people, things, ideals, ideas, ideologies, roles, identities. And the more attached we are, the more vulnerable we are to chasing those attachments at the expense of ourselves. And so what I try to do is combine Eastern and Western psychology in this book, because I think the world is getting smaller, despite the tariffs. and I think that the next generation of thinking will be able to rely on both Eastern and Western psychology to understand human nature.
So was there a logical process to the order that you brought these attachments to the world through your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started probably with the most fundamental, which is your worldview, which is your attachment to stability. And we believe that we can create stability and safety in our lives, but there's really no such thing. Every time we breathe, the world changes. And we love the feeling, but it's not sustainable. And so by fearing change, we resist the world as it shows up for us, and we end up trying to live on our terms versus life's terms. The key is to really live in a world of agility. And by accepting uncertainty as reality and seeing stability as a neurological and psychological illusion inside our brains, we can stay agile and adapt more easily to change. And people are all over the map on this. But we have to change our relationship to change in two ways. One is we have to get comfortable living with just enough anxiety, because what follows uncertainty is vulnerability and anxiety, and it's just real. And rather than pathologize and run away from this sense of tension inside ourselves, we have to stay open to uncertainty. And it trips a lot of people up. And the second thing about change is that we have to realize that change doesn't happen to us, it happens for us. It is a catalyst for growth and opening up one's perspective. And so I think a lot of people get tripped up with this attachment to stability, and I thought it was the most important one to lead with.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I also love your use of language there, because I think that's so powerful too, how we choose to frame certain aspects of life. Have to versus get to, etc. Right? There's
Right.
different things that we can look at there. And that fact that we're always in a state of change. Every breath is an example that we take in. We are different than we were with the breath prior. And it reminds me of that saying, I know I'll probably butcher this, but a man doesn't step in the same river twice, because the river is not the same, nor is the man.
Yes.
And yeah, so when I think about stability and the aspiration of agility, it brings to mind for me entrepreneurship. And I don't want to put everybody in the same bucket, but I do find, and I'd be curious from your perspective as well, I do find that many entrepreneurs are able to be more agile, and they seem to be okay with instability, meaning that they're willing to take risks, and they know that they're constantly in a state of adaptation and iteration and trying new things and not getting locked down into something having to be a certain way. Do you see that at all? Am I not looking at that the right way? And again, I don't want to put everyone in the same bucket, because we're all different.
I see it exactly that way. I think entrepreneurs are experimenters.
Mm.
They live life experimenting with hypotheses, and they're willing to try things, and sometimes those things are risky, and they're also willing to let them go. And there's a concept in organic growth called affordable loss. And so they take risks. The good ones take risks with affordable loss. They're willing to risk, but not too much that it sort of burns down the house. And I think that's a secret of really smart entrepreneurship. But absolutely, they have a very different relationship to change. No question about it.
Okay. So let's talk about the attachment to the past. I know this is something that you dealt with personally.
No.
It's something you mentioned toward the beginning of our conversation. Absolutely something that I contend with and have had to really do a lot of work on. And so I suppose the aspiration for that, I think that's using the vernacular that you have in your book, is really accepting and forgiving old demons. So give us some strategies, if you will, some things that we can do. And I'm thinking about myself here, but I know this is applicable for many who are watching and listening right now. But maybe share a few things that we can do to work through that attachment to holding on to the past.
Well, many of us have it. I mean, some people are living in the past more than others. We tend to idealize or demonize our memories. We become immobilized by old emotional scars, relationships that didn't work, or business deals that went sour. And by not facing the truth and practicing forgiveness, we get stuck on the past. The secret is obviously to let go of the past and to surrender. Sometimes harder than just putting words to it. But it involves accepting and forgiving our demons and facing the truth with honesty and compassion. Um, and so I see five things that has to happen in order to do this. And one is you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're not comfortable being uncomfortable, you'll never look at the past for what it was, because it did make you anxious or angry or sad for a reason. Secondly, is you have to discover the deeper emotions associated with this and then learn to surrender to them and let go, acknowledge the truth. But you may not be the same person that you were when you experienced this past event or situation. You now are probably a more evolved adult with more tools that can deal with it. Then we have to learn how to forgive both ourselves for chasing the past and getting hijacked by the past, and we also have to forgive others. Doesn't mean we forget what they did, but we forgive them. And I give a perfect example of this. Many people carry baggage about their parents, but one of the rites of passage into healthy adulthood is recognizing that your parents did the best they could given the tools that they had. Doesn't take them off the hook, okay, at all. But you don't want them leading your life. You want to lead your own life. And then you rewrite your story. You basically say, they did what they could. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I am an adult now, and I can take responsibility for my life, and I can retitle my story. And it is something that just pulls people down from the past. I write stories in the book about people who go through these things, and there's this one story of a business executive of a Fortune 50 company who had a pretty difficult relationship with his father. And his father never supported what he wanted to do in his life. But eventually he made sense of it in therapy, and he was able to follow these steps and let it go and surrender and forgive his father and appreciate the good things that he did despite the bad things that he exhibited.
Beautiful. First of all, thank you for sharing that. And as we're staying on this particular attachment for just another moment,
Yeah.
it amazes me, and you experience this and have come across obviously many who do, but it's amazing to me that the memories that we have, that we think about, that we tie to our past, those memories have been rewritten time and time again. So they're not even necessarily rooted in fact. And often those storylines that we tell ourselves that we think belong to us are storylines that may have been given to us through generations, through our parents, through grandparents, through conversations and so forth. But it's so interesting to think about that, because it just shows us how those stories are not always rooted in reality. There may be pieces of reality in there, right? But it accentuates the fact that we have the ability and the power once we're aware, to be able to rewrite those stories, which ultimately can change the trajectory of our lives.
Yeah. What we end up doing is we end up living on other people's stages rather than our own. And we have
Mm.
much more control over our life. But if we talk about the attachment to control, we have to be careful here to distinguish what we can and cannot control. Um, yeah, I think you're really right with this.
Okay, so since you brought that up, the attachment to control, talk about the things that we do control and the things that are outside our control.
Well, many of us from early childhood are taught to shape our environment. We take charge, we cleverly maneuver or influence our way around life, and we're determined to control oftentimes the uncontrollable. And we hide our vulnerability and we risk becoming too attached to control. And oftentimes, the reason that we do that is we're fearful of being vulnerable. And so we try to control a situation, or we're mistrustful of ourselves and other people. And therefore, we control to manage our anxiety because we're mistrustful and that we won't get what we want. And this happens all the time in life and in business. As executives are dealing with this issue all the time around virtual work. If you cannot trust the employees that you hire to work virtually, it will eat your heart up. So it really is a big issue here. So by practicing trust and getting comfortable with vulnerability, you can distinguish what you can and cannot control. Now, some people like to control others. Some people are controlled by others. Some people are passive aggressive. Others are people pleasers. But control is the central organizing theme in all of those relationships. So there's a basic principle in psychology called ceaseless striving. And it basically is chasing outcomes of things that you have no control over. And it is the source of tremendous anxiety for people. So the healthiest among us are people who can distinguish those things and are constantly asking the question, do I have control over this or not?
Great question to ask, and it's this is a really interesting piece of the conversation when I think about the area of control and do I have control over someone else. I don't control what someone else does or doesn't do. I don't have control over how someone else is going to respond to something that I've done or something that I say. What I do have control over is my own actions, my attitude, the way that I show up, the way that I communicate, and many other things. But I think to your point, again, going back to self-awareness and asking ourselves, and I love that, do I have control over this? And then, as I often say, and I wasn't the one that coined this, but control the controllables.
Yeah.
And what you don't control, I tend to let go, or I work to let go.
It's healthy. It's healthy, Jay. And
Yeah.
see, I think one of the big issues for people is that they don't love themselves.
Mm.
And if you truly love yourself, you're not going to let yourself get attached to these 10 attachments because you prioritize yourself. Loving yourself is non-negotiable, but it is amazing how many people walk around and they do things that undermine their own self-love. And I don't mean narcissistic. I mean just loving yourself. And I think it is probably the most important ingredient to mental well-being.
So you had mentioned that, and I believe it wasn't until your 50s that you finally realized that you were in love with yourself. Did I get that right?
Yeah, in a positive way. I mean,
Sure.
in a non-narcissistic way, but yeah, I stopped doing things that undermined myself, my attachment to the past, the attachment to the future, the attachment to success. It didn't mean that I wasn't successful anymore. It's just, the attachment to success is such an important thing for business people. And let me just take a second to just talk about that.
Sure.
When our desire for success turns into a compulsive need for achievement, we've got a problem because we define success from the outside in based on other people's expectations or rewards or recognition or money or prestige and not our own. And this is often driven by a fear of failure, of having to prove that you're worthy enough. And it leads to an attachment to success. So the remedy is to move from having a scarcity mindset where the cup is half empty and there's a hole on the bottom and you're trying to refill that cup all the time, or the principle of abundance, that you have everything that you need right now. And it is amazing how many people have trouble with accepting that they have everything that they need right now. It doesn't mean that you stop stretching, doesn't mean that you stop dreaming, doesn't mean that you stop achieving. It's just the way you see yourself is to say, I got everything that I need right now with a sense of abundance. And you love yourself unconditionally for that. So I think a lot of business people struggle with this one.
I would definitely agree with you on that one. And I'm raising my hand because that's certainly one that I have struggled with. And actually, and the reason I asked you or reiterated what you had said about, finally when you were in your 50s, I'm 60. And it really, for me, has just been within the past couple of years
Yeah.
or so with a lot of deep work where I've come to a place where success isn't tied to external things. For so many years, I chased all of the external things and acquired many of those things, but they were empty. I mean, they were fun at the time, but I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but for you personally, there were many things that you were going after to try to find
To fill
fulfillment or
myself up.
self-worth to
Yeah,
right. And but once you achieve it, it's like, did you arrive, or was
exactly.
it like, oh, okay, what's next?
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And there are many, many people. And the thing is that as you move through your 40s and 50s, those awards and that recognition become less meaningful, and relationships and being comfortable with yourself and within your own skin become much more important. And and they have a big impact on your health and well-being as well. Now,
So
now
true.
some people who can't do this, they can get attached to pleasure. And what I mean by that is that we throw alcohol and drugs and overeating and social media at ourselves to anesthetize ourselves so that we don't feel uncomfortable. So
Mm.
all of these attachments create discomfort, but a lot of us don't want to feel uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. And so what we do is we throw things at it, to pretend that we're comfortable when we're really not. And we don't look at the issues underneath ourselves, which ultimately would solve the problem. And that's really what the attachment to pleasure is all about. And if you can't sort of get comfortable being uncomfortable and view anxiety as a positive force in your life, then you trip up.
That one really hits home. I had Dr. Anna Lemke on the
Right.
podcast who wrote
There
a
you
book
go.
called Dopamine Nation, and I tell you, it was stunning to hear from her, but to understand what's going on in the brain and how, we're all addicted to something, right? And you gave a personal example when you were going through your surgeries
Yep.
and you became addicted to opiates. And so can you tie that for just a moment to pleasure that you were just speaking to, and how that impacted you?
Big time. Um, uh, I would burn out, and the feeling of burnout was horrible. And so what I did was I kept taking my Vicodin and Percocet, which I learned to take, and I happen to be a responder. Some people
Mm.
respond to alcohol, some people respond to cigarettes, to food. I was a responder to opiates. And so it was a way for me to run away from the feelings of burnout. And, um, you know, it goes nowhere. And so I've been sober for 5 years, you gotta address that because it's not good for your overall well-being.
It's so true. Well, my friends, we have been talking about the book Detach. We've been talking about attachments, and Bob has provided us a wealth of information. Of course, we really have just scratched the surface. There is so much more to this book, and I would encourage each and every one of you to go out, buy a copy, and most importantly, read and apply what you learn through that book. So, Bob, as we are wrapping up our conversation today, I have one last question for you and then an ask. And here's my question: what is, outside of family, what is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
Wow. Uh, my friendships. My friendships are very meaningful to me. And there's something about the unconditional love of a pet. I
Oh,
mean, I have a fantastic dog. Her name is Tessa. She's a St. Bernard mix with a golden retriever, and she is the kindest, most loving specimen I've ever touched and met in my life. And she is the great teacher. Um, uh, the other thing I wanted to say is that we have just finished the design of a 40-item assessment, the Detach assessment and report, which is a pretty sophisticated report that you get back that tells you what level of attachment you are to each of the 10 attachments. And then each attachment has a workbook associated with it. And I'm really excited because I wanted to make this accessible for people. And we also have a book club guide and things like that. But the assessment and report and the workbooks, I'm very proud of.
fantastic. And those are available from your website?
Yeah, at bobrosen.com. Pretty
Got
easily.
it. Very good. Well, we have all of your social handles, your website, where to purchase your book. Obviously, we're going to put that in the show notes. And I know personally, I'm going to take that assessment. And I would encourage all of you that are watching and listening right now to do exactly the same thing, because our ability to change comes from awareness, right? So, what better way to become self aware than to take this assessment and have that mirror right in front of you? So, I love that. So, Bob, here is my ask. I would love it if you would give all of us, everyone that's watching and listening right now, and me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
I would ask yourself, what are you scared of? because I think that question gets at the heart of what shackles us, what sabotages us, what keeps us back.
Mm.
And I believe that our fears will set us free.
So good. What a great challenge. I wrote that one down and I probably have more than one answer for it, but nonetheless, I'm going to contemplate on that one and make sure that that I'm clear on what scares me so I can make sure to set myself free. So I thank you for that. Dr. Bob, thank you very much for today's conversation. I truly appreciate you joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What an insightful and enlightening conversation. I appreciate your wisdom and I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jay. It's great being with you.
Thank you. You too, sir. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and listening. I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take just a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps our podcast grow and expand its reach and attract incredible guests just like Bob. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, my friends, keep learning and growing. Please go out and pick up a copy of Detach, and we will see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.